continuation of our lecture regarding the reasons or what are the causes of development gap, or also known as the south, or I mean the north and then the south gap. So we have three here, namely as the environmental, we have historical as well, and then we have socioeconomic. So first one here for environmental, of course, it pertains about natural calamities, like for example, uh, typhoons, all of those things. So pwede rin yan. However, it is not only limited on some of the natural disasters that we have or that we are experiencing for now, or even the natural calamities that we have. It pertains more on what are the available sources uh, provided on the territory of a certain nation. So, like for example, one reason of environmental gap, or I mean developmental gap for environment, is we have the abundance of oil, di ba? The abundance of natural resources. Let's take an example. We have the country of UAE, or United Arab Emirates, or let us say we have the Saudi Arabia as well. So coming from those nations or states, they have their own natural resources. Na of course we all know that it is known as the black soil, di ba? So we're in that Middle East, specifically Saudi Arabia and then UAE. Those countries are very rich in terms of oil. Of course, those oil can be considered as the black oil. So after refinement of those black oil, it could become gasoline oil, methane gas. It could become diesel oil. So coming from those oils, these oils are being exported on the different parts of the country. And we all know that Middle East is the number one producer of oil, di ba? And of course, the number one consumer of oil is we have the United States of America. Even though they have their own plantation of oils in America, madami naman sa kanila. I'm not depriving them having the abundance of oil in America. So however, compared on the different parts of the world, number one talaga is we have UAE, or United Arab Emirates, and then we have Saudi Arabia. Another example here of natural features, di ba, of the developmental gap. Here in the Philippines, we have different natural resources. So for the information of everyone, we have very high in terms of gold. Okay. However, minsan, even though we have the very high natural resources in terms of gold, these are useless without proper utilization. So what do I mean by that? First of all, if the country does not have a proper equipment in order for them to extract gold coming from the soil, so therefore it is useless, di ba? Kasi nga, you need to extract the gold beneath the soil until such time that gold will be yours, di ba? And then, of course, in terms of extraction, it does not only pertain on digging the soil. Kailangan mo rin ng some equipment that will separate the gold, or you need to process those soils in order for you to have a finished product, which is gold. Diba? So, however, here in the Philippines, the main problem natin dyan, kadamihan ng mga companies who are working with the extraction of gold beneath the soil were private companies. Like for example, the Felix Mines, that is a private company. Ano pa, we have the Lepanto Mining, di ba? In Mangkayan. Felix Mines, I think that is in Itogon naman. And we have we have a lot of private companies who are operating here in the Philippines. Kasi nga, we do not, or we lack the equipment that will try to extract the gold from the soil. So, ang nangyayari, some of our natural resources are not being given to the country itself, to the Philippines itself. However, ang nagigain ng profit dyan ay we have the private companies. From what I said a while back, they are the ones who have their own equipment. They have invested their own money from those equipment. Of course, sa kanila mapupunta yung profit on whatever gold that they could extract on our own soil. However, you try to compare naman in Saudi Arabia and UAE, most of their government, or yeah, may private companies then, but some of their government programs, they have some equipment that they're using for extracting those oil. Kaya mayaman ang Saudi Arabia and then UAE. Yun nga, one reason here is environment. So binigyan sila ng isang siguro biyaya or blessing coming from their God, Allah, wherein yan. So that's why may income sila. So they have a high GDP in terms of exporting on their oil and so on and so forth. So those are different examples uh, under environmental on bakit ba some of the countries are richer compared to others, di ba? Second, reason of developmental gap or the north and then the south gap. Why some of the countries on the north are becoming richer and why some countries on the south are becoming poorer, di ba? So next here is it could be historical. So in terms of historical, we have a lot. It could pertain about war. It could pertain about the colonization of the superpowers. What are the things that happened before? So, of course, when you say history, it pertains about the past. And remember, past influences our own present, even our own future. Why? Because the past is the one who decided the things that may happen in the present. The same with the present, we are deciding on the things that may happen on the future. So, ganun lang umiikot ang reason yon. Okay, so example here of war. Di ba? If you try to observe, of course, age of discovery, when you say age of discovery, nagkaroon ng mga colonization. There are some superpowers, like for example, yung mga, ayan, Spain, Portugal, Great Britain, I mean, France, together with the United States. So they have their own colonies coming from the 16th century hanggang umabot sa even in 20th century. So uso ang colonization before. Now, in terms of war, madami na nagkaroon ng war. I think if you're going to count, halos hindi mo pa nga mabilang kung ilang war na ang nangyari sa buong mundo. It could be civil war, it could be world war, it could be a war between different countries and so on and so forth. Now here, if you try to observe some of the states that were colonized before by Americans and then Japanese, uh, in the time of their own colonization, of course, we cannot deny the fact that there were abuses, there were authoritarian, diba? There were being unfair for the people of that country. Like for example, the Philippines, diba? Spain colonized the Philippines, and of course, we were para tayong tawag nito, we were affected or we were, it's like para tayong mga alila ng mga Kastila. In other words, di ba? The same with Americans. Hindi naman sa Americans talaga. Ang kadamihan talaga yung mga pag-aabuso or mga abuses that we had suffered, it came from Spaniards, di ba? So, you try to look on the colonies of the United States. So during their times in the 20th century, they have colonized some of the countries, or sabi nila, on the 20th century, the USA saved some of the colonies by the Spaniards during the Age of Discovery coming from Great Britain, Portugal, and then the Spain, di ba? So however, kadamihan, I'm not telling naman lahat, kadamihan ng colonies that were adopted by the United States, you try to observe their own economy, political stability, or their own livelihood, or yung pamumuhay nila ngayon. Diba parang, like for example, Hawaii, di ba? It is the 50th colony, the 50th state of United States. Now, you try to go in Hawaii. Noon, mahirap lang Hawaii. However, it was developed by the central government of America. And you try to observe Hawaii. Mayaman ba to? Hindi naman siya masyadong mayaman. but it has a great opportunities for the people of Hawaii. The Hawaiis, di ba? They have the proper establishments, they have buildings. Of course, the main source of income of Hawaii is tourism. However, of course, because of this pandemic, medyo nahihirapan sila. But what I'm telling here is some of the states that were adopted by the Americans became hindi naman successful, or they became developed or well developed, di ba? And of course, Philippines was one of the colonies of the USA before. However, we gained independence kasi si Quezon yan. Quezon insisted for us to become independent from any external influence or foreign influence. Kasi nga, of course, they have suffered from the abuses of the Spaniards. So yan, binigyan naman tayo ng independent. But now, you try to compare the Philippines. So sa tingin niyo ba ang Pilipinas ngayon ay it is a well-developed country? Of course, it's not. Kasi nga Philippines is a third world country, 'di ba? What if you imagine if we did not have our own independence during the 1946, or we were not given independence, or what if Manuel Quezon, or former President Manuel Quezon, did not try to insist to become independent? Rather, we became part of United States. So ibig sabihin, we are a state of United States of America. So paano kaya? What do you think? Sa tingin nyo ba magiging successful ba tayo? Or do we have a well-developed country compared with some of the America's states? Di ba? Ano pa ba? What are some of the states of America? We have Hawaii, we have Guam on the east part of the Philippines. And then when you try to go to Guam, then hindi naman siya ganun kayaman. But in terms of the livelihood of the people there, they are not living in poverty compared here in the Philippines. I am not telling naman that if we were adopted as a state of America, we will become successful. However, if you try to observe then, some of those states, or majority of the states that were adopted by America, became successful. So, yun yung mga yun. So, those are some examples under historical. So, we have a lot then. Sa war naman, madami rin. Okay? But I will not anymore try to discuss on that. Third, we have the socio-economic. When you say socio-economic, except for historical, environmental, we talk about naman what are the cultures that we have, what are the religions that the country has, and what kind of society do we have. Remember, society differs from each other. There is no society that are actually the same, or there is no society that is imitated by the other as is. Even though a society has been imitated by another society, it does not mean that they have the same principles, traditions, and all of the aspects of society. What I'm telling here is every society differs from each other. Okay? So here, example here of socio-economic or a culture that may influence or that may affect the development gap or the north and then the south gap. Bakit kaya may mas mayaman na country compared to other countries? Is one example is the diversified cultures that we have in our own country or in our own nation. Okay, so what do you think is the reason bakit kaya? Okay, bakit kaya that because of diversified cultures of a certain nation may affect the development of a certain country? Very simple. Of course, differences may become a strength or weakness, di ba? Strength in terms of differences or diversified culture, we may have different uniqueness. So ibig sabihin, bawat isa sa atin, we are unique. Kasi nga, we have different cultures. Let us try to take Philippines as an example. Philippines is a single nation. However, there are different diversified cultures that we have in the Philippines. Example, di ba? Ang dami-dami. May mga Bisaya, Cebuano, Bicolano, Kapampangan, Ilocano, Cordillerans, at madami pang iba. Even Muslims kasali din. So, in terms of the strength of the diversified cultures that we have, we create a lot of uniqueness in our own country, di ba? Or in our own nation. However, the negative effect of the diversified cultures that we have, it may give now a conflict on the creation of laws that we have. 'Di ba? So, paano magkakaroon ng conflict yan? You try to get an example on the Congress or on the lower house or yung mga senators natin. So, from the Congress itself, of course, magkakaiba ng culture ng mga yan. In the Congress, I think there are around 300 plus representatives there coming from the different regions, different provinces. And they have their own different cultures as well. 'Di ba? So, if one person created a law that he thinks may develop a certain group of people, like for example, Cordillera, of course, baka may magreklamo na culture na naman coming from other province na bakit ganun, meron silang ganyan. Diba? So, what I'm telling here is, because of the diversified cultures that we have, sometimes it makes us parang nade-delay, di ba? It makes us struggle from on how are we going to create the laws of the nation, considering the benefit of all cultures in our own nation. At mahirap yan, di ba? Because I think there is no law that will be applied to all of the cultures. It's like you're teaching something or you have created a law on your own classroom with diversified students. Hindi ibig sabihin, pag effective ang approach mo with another class, effective rin yung approach mo with some of your classes or another class mo na naman. Di ba? So what I'm telling here is, yan, isang reason ng development gap natin is we have our own culture being diversified. Even religion itself, di ba? And of course, majority naman sa atin dito, I think here is we have a Roman Catholicism. However, religion may as well affect the development gap of a certain nation. Next, some countries are developing faster than the others. Many Asian countries are quickly developing, while many African countries are slowly developing. Now, if you observe the map here, the yellow ones are the developed world countries, including we have the United States, Canada, on the North America, and then for Asia, we have the Russia, of course, having the biggest territory, and then we have the European countries as well, including here sa baba, we have the Australia. And then for the green one, it pertains naman, of course, the quickly developing country, or silang tinatawag as well as developing country lang. Of course, here for the Asia, we have the China, India, and then we have the Egypt for the North Africa, and then for the Latin America, coming from Mexico, from the Bahamas, going down to Argentina, and then Chile, di ba? But however, meron din tayong red naman dito, sila yung mga slowly developing countries. Sa Asia naman, we have some of them as, like for example, Myanmar, so yung mga yan. And then kadamihan ng mga countries that are slowly developing or the least developed countries are found in the continent of Africa. An example of those, ang dami, especially on the middle part of Africa, considering yung mga yan, Ethiopia, and then Kenya, Somalia, and then even Yemen, kasali rin ang Yemen dyan. So, kadamihan of the less developed countries were found on Africa. However, Sinasabi nila, Philippines is one of the developing countries. But did you ever know that Philippines was a developing country 30 years ago pa? Okay? Or let us say 22 or 25 years ago pa, that the Philippines is a developing country. And according here, naka-color green tayo, we are quickly developing world. So quickly, di ba? There is the word quickly. I would say no. Kasi nga, for 20 to 25 years, do you think that is a quick developing? And yan, dumidiretso pa yan hanggang I do not know whatever years man na dumating na we are developing, di ba? So, I do not know if Marcos tried to continue his own service kung developing pa rin tayo. Medyo nasira kasi some of his projects during the time of Cory Aquino. Okay lang naman sa akin si Cory Aquino. I'm not a supporter of Marcos. However, para sa akin lang, some of the projects of the Marcos regime are very good. Pero hindi siya natuloy during the time of Cory administration. Maybe because of personal alam niyo na, personal personal reason siguro ni Cory Aquino about his grudge to the Marcos regime, all of those things. Kaya para makalimutan ng bayan regarding the abuses of the Marcoses, better not to continue na lang some of his projects, di ba? Like for example, the Bataan Power Plant. If so ever nagkaroon man tayo ng Bataan Power Plant, maybe in Luzon, we became independent sana in terms of our own electricity because there is a nuclear power plant. So ibig sabihin, hindi na natin kailangan ng mga geothermal energies or mga hydro energies. Like for example, we have the dams. Kung sa wind energies, we need the wind, we need the water in order for us to generate some of the electricity. We do not need anymore some of the private companies for us to buy our own electricity. Like for example, the Aboitiz power, or di ba? Because the Aboitiz is the one or one of the private companies who are providing electricity to us. Yung mga Beneco, of course, Beneco is a private company, is now, siya naman kasi nagpo-provide ng electricity. However, Beneco is buying the electricity coming from Aboitiz. So, that is for your information. Baka sa tingin nyo, it is the Beneco who are supplying our own electricity. They're only the provider. Meaning, sila yung mga responsible in terms of pagkabit ng mga cables. However, they're not the one who are really producing electricity. Okay? One of which is we have the Aboitiz. And I think the Aboitiz, madaming Aboitiz ano dito mga parang generating powers nila. Okay? So, major differences in North and then South. Some of the major differences in North are as follows. Okay, so let's try muna to compare about the population of the North and then the South. If you observe, population of the North is not that very big, but on South, ang dami nila. Di ba? Example alone here in the Philippines, and I think we are around 110 million na ata as of 2020. And for some of the North countries naman, even though they have a large number of their population, it is approximate naman in terms of the land mass. So, ibig sabihin, madami man sila, pero malawak yung kanilang territory. So, wherein everyone could live or pwede silang magpatayo ng kanilang bahay on the different parts of the land mass of the nation. Di ba? And then north and then south. Of course, we have high wealth versus low wealth. Of course, mas mayaman talaga ang north, di ba? Compared with the south. Very good example of that is Japan or South Korea compared with the Philippines. So, and explain ko na before that in South Korea, the minimum wage there is a lot more bigger compared to the Philippines. Here in the Philippines, we're being paid on the daily basis, di ba?
And based on an average of minimum wage natin, if you're on the capital region or NCR, I think the minimum wage there is 500 pesos every day. However, here in some part of Baguio City and Benguet, we have 300 pesos a day. So, yan. However, in South Korea, you're not being paid for a daily basis. You're being paid on hour basis. So, ilang hours ka nagtrabaho sa isang araw. And for the information of everyone, in South Korea, 1 hour is equivalent for 300 pesos. Diba? And imagine for the whole day, nagtrabaho ka siguro ng 8 hours and 300 times 8. So, ilan na yan? So, for 1 day lang, sweldo mo na is 8, 16, 24. So, meron ka ng 2,400. Di ba? So, sweldo mo, 8 hours ka lang nagtrabaho in South Korea, you have your own 2,400 compared here in the Philippines na meron kang nagtrabaho ka ng buong araw, 10 hours to 12 hours, but you only get 300 pesos. So, from that income difference, of course, mas mayaman talaga ang tao in the North or in the South Korea compared with the South nations, di ba? And even though we have those inequalities in terms of the income, we also have some differences on the standard of living. Kaya nga sabi natin, 'di ba? Mataas ang sweldo mo doon. However, mataas din ang bilihin. Kaya some of the OFWs who are explaining to us, even though they have very high salaries being paid for foreign countries or being paid by the foreign countries, it does not mean that they are very rich on that country. Kasi nga, yung babayaran mo din on that certain well-developed country ay parang medyo mahal din. Example, for Singapore, if you try to go in Singapore, bottled water. Diba? Here for a bottled water, absolute man yan or what, I think you could buy a bottled water around 10 to 15 pesos or mga 250 ml na bottled water. However, in Singapore, one of my friends talked to me who visited Singapore, isang bottle of water lang nila, that is around 100 to 150 pesos. So, mahal talaga ang bilhin sa Singapore. However, pag nagtrabaho sa Singapore din, medyo mataas din ang sweldo mo. Kaya, some of the Filipino o some of the OFWs, gustong-gusto nila nag-remit ng pera for Philippine peso. Or gustong-gusto nila that if they try to work hard in abroad, gusto nila they would like to have a lot of savings so that pag pumunta sila dito sa Pilipinas, masusulit nila yung pera nilang na-gain from that foreign country. Diba? And then next here is in terms of factory, in terms of producing some of the products, in the north, major factories nila are in terms of industrial development. When I say industry, these are the use of the machines, di ba? And then of course, for the south, low industrial development. Very good example alone is Philippines, Filipino farmers compared with the Japanese farmers. If you try to compare on how they grow their own crops, of course, for Japan, madami silang technological advancement that may beat some of our traditional way of farming. Sa Japan, meron silang isang machine na nag-aayos ng lupa, may isang machine na nagtatanim, and so what, and so on and so forth. And even in construction as well, if you're a construction worker in Japan, it does not mean that you're going to do the hard labor. Like for example, mano-mano kang magtitimpla ng semento. Mano-mano mong tawag nito, aalambrehan yung mga bakal. Mano-mano ka na hard labor, di ba? Compared here in the Philippines, kung construction worker ka, ganoon ang gawain mo. Taga-buhat, halo ng semento, utos dyan, utos doon, and whatsoever. However, in Japan, halos lahat ng ginagawa mo, if you're a construction worker, you only need to operate the machines. Di ba? Kaya hindi magkakalyo ang kamay mo. So, those are some of the differences. Yan, sabi ko nga in North, more on industry sila, meaning more on the use of the machines in order to make the life easier na rin and to make the work efficient, di ba? However, in the South, kadamihan pa rin ng ating livelihood comes from agriculture. Like for example of those, of course, we have the use of the lands that we have for us to be able to get some of those products, di ba? Okay, so here we have some of the graphs that may give us some of the differences in terms of the north and then the south. For the population, I'm sorry, medyo mali yan. So for the population, 71% is kadamihan or total population of the globe comes from the south. Okay, so nagkabaliktad lang. And 29% of the population comes from the north. Okay, so if I'm not mistaken, we are around 7 billion ata based on the statistics that I have. When I say 7 billion, 7 billion yung population natin for the whole world. Kasi 1 billion, alam na natin, galing sa China yan. And some of those population came on India, ano pa bang mga kalakihang mga population. So all in all, I think we are 7 to 8 billion people living in the globe. And out of that 7 to 8 billion, 29% came from the north and then 71% came from the south. Okay? So sabi nga natin, lesser in population on the north and then higher population on the south. However, in terms of wealth, magkakaiba na sila mamaya. So for the railroad mileage, ito tama na to. The rest tama na, yung population lang mali kanina. So for the railroad na mileage naman, of course, when you say mileage, gaano kahaba yung mga railroads natin or gaano kadami ang railroads compared with the north countries compared with the south countries. So out of all of the railroads around the world, kadamihan ng railroad can be found with the north countries. So kadamihan ng mga well-developed countries, one of their major transportation there is not with the use of the car, but uh, they have their own train management system, 'di ba? So of course, example of those is we have Japan, 'di ba? They have some of the fastest train system even in Europe. And even in China, they have their own train system then. So based on the graph, 28% of the railroad can be found from the south and then 72% can be found on the north. Okay? So next naman dito, medyo malaki or iron or steel production. Most likely for the north, they are the ones or they are the number one producers of steel. And then for the south then, only 8%. They only got 8% in terms of iron and steel production. So sabi ko nga before, some of the materials being used by the north countries who are producing some of this iron or steel came from the South countries. It came from, let us say, India, kadamihan ng mga raw materials nila, and it was processed on the North since they have, sabi ko nga, they have their own equipment or machines that will process some of these raw materials to become a finished product, which is iron and then steel. And for the wealth distribution, only 1/4 was given for the South and then 75%. Yan. Kaya nga sabi natin, in terms of the wealth talagang unfair. Di ba? In terms of population, mas madami ang South. However, they only get the least minimal or amount of salary they could get coming from the income of the whole world. Imagine mo, let us say kung may income ang buong mundo ng let us say $100 trillion, di ba? And then 25% or 25 trillion will only be given with the South countries. And then yung 75% will be given with the North countries. You try to consider pa about their own population. So talagang yayaman talaga itong North countries compared with the South, di ba? Next here is the value of exports. Meaning here is sinong mas madaming nagbibigay ng export. What do we mean by exportation? We are selling our own products on the foreign countries. Okay? When you say importation naman, we are buying products from foreign countries. So for the North countries, kadamihan ng products nila were being exported to the different parts of the world. Example ko nga, sabi natin, we have Saudi Arabia, UAE, they're exporting their own oil products. So they're exporting oil to US, exporting oil to European countries. And then for Japan naman, they're exporting their own cars, automobiles on the different parts of the countries, on the different parts of the globe. 'Di ba? For your information pa nga, mas madami daw ang bumibili ng sasakyan nila coming from the countries. Like for example, the Philippines, Indonesia, most likely India pa, kadamihan. However, mga locals nila or mga Japanese, they less likely to buy those Japanese cars. Kasi nga, the lives or the livelihood in Japan, di ba? They are not used into automobiles. Mas pipiling pa lang gumamit ng bike, di ba? Their mode of transportation is in Japan is mga bicycles with the use of electric train. So they are sinusulit nila yung mga public transportation nila. Okay? So factories, sabi ko nga, kadamihan ng factories can be found on the north compared from the south. And then large farms. So dito naman, of course, kadamihan ng livelihood ng south natin came from agriculture. Compared with the north countries, mainly of their main livelihood ng north is we have those factories or mga industry nila. So next, classifying countries. So there are countries can be classified into three different types, known as the most developed countries or the MDCs, the less developed countries, and then the least developed countries. So actually parehas lang ito. Medyo nag-iiba lang sila in terms on the concept being used. It depends on what organization is using, whether it is MDC, pares lang siya kanina, di ba? We have the quickly developed countries or the well-developed countries, the slowly developed countries. So halos magkakaparehas lang yung mga yan. Nabago lang yung word na ginamit nila. So here, when we say MDC or most developed countries, it pertains on the riches of the industrialized and then democratic nations of the world. Example of MDCs here, we have the Japan, USA, Russia, South Korea, Turkey, Great Britain or UK, and then even Canada. So alam naman natin na sila yung mga pinakamamayaman sa buong mundo, di ba? And then for less developed countries, sila naman yung quickly developing or also known as developing countries with little industrial development, little wealth as well, and then a very high population growth. So meaning, even though it's not approximate on their own production regarding their own population. So kahit maganda yung production nila, hindi siya pumapatas sa growth of population. So meaning, mas mabilis na tumataas yung population compared with the growth of their own industry. As much as possible sana, better if yung industry is growing faster compared with the population. However, for less developed countries or developing countries, ang nangyayari kasi, even though maganda ang production nila in terms of industry, however, mas mabilis na tumataas yung population. Kaya hindi pa rin sila nagiging developed countries. So of course, and lastly, we have the least developed countries. They have a very low per capita income. low literacy rate, and very little in the way of manufacturing industries. For least developed countries, kadamihan na makikita natin dito ay mga African states, di ba? Yung naka-red kanina, based on the map, like for example, Kenya, Ethiopia, Ghana, all of those things. I think even Madagascar yata. However, for them, yun yung mga mahirap na talaga, and then low literacy. When we say low literacy, walang masyadong education being given to the people, all of those things. And then they are ignorant on how they will be given a salary. So, yung mga bagay na yan. So, alam naman na natin yung mga yun. Okay. So this picture of the Earth night shows the wealthy global North illuminating its communities at night, and the much poorer global South which can't afford to do so. Now, coming from this picture, so it was taken during the night yan, di ba? If you can observe the picture, many of the well-developed countries have more lightings compared to least or less developed countries. So example alone, parang if you observe the picture, parang yung light it is more for United States of America or on the west part of United States, considering some states like the Boston, even in Massachusetts, and ano pa yung mga iba, even in the state of Miami, New York. So yung mga yan, so kadamihan sa kanila or kadamihan ng lightings can be found on the west part of America. Okay? However, pag dadako naman tayo sa Europe, you try to compare the continent of Europe compared with the African continent. There is a very big difference, di ba? And on African continent, halos wala kang makitang ilaw or some of the lightings. Even though we have some, but majority of those lightings can be found on the north part of the African continent, di ba? But when you try to go with the European countries, almost all countries on the European or on the Europe, lahat sila may ilaw, 'di ba? And even in India, if you try to observe India there, kahit papaano meron naman. Okay, you try again to on the east part of Asia or the east of Asia, we have Japan. Imagine nyo yung Japan, most likely halos lahat may ilaw. Even in Taiwan and then I do not know if you could see the South and then North Korea here, halos may ilaw, di ba? And then on the Philippines, hindi gaano kita. However, yung ilaw or the lightings are more concentrated on the capital region or on Manila. So, coming from this picture, dito mo na makikita that there are some inequalities in terms of industry, technology, and then the use of the machines. Sabi nga natin, we have the least developed countries. So, ibig sabihin, wala silang proper lightings. Like for example, walang street lights. There are no night establishments. Like for example, bars. So walang nagtatrabaho pag gabi, tulog lahat ng tao. However, with the well-developed countries, the work is 24 hours, di ba? Some of the buildings, naka-on pa yung mga ilaw niyan dahil may mga nagtatrabaho pa. Yung iba naman, tulog na, and so on and so forth. So here, of course, yung mas madaming ilaw, ano bang implication nito? Maybe some of you would be asking, Sir, anong implication ng mga ilaw na yan? Of course, it pertains about the use of technology. Sino ba ang may mas madaming technology in terms of their own industry? Kasi nga sabi natin, we are talking about industry versus agriculture, di ba? So, yan. Based on those lightings, kung sino mas madaming ilaw, big sabihin, mas madaming industry, factory, or technology being used by that nation. So, comparison. Of course, between North and South is not of only one aspect. It can be seen through different angles that are somewhat political, economical, and then social. So here we have a table that may explain to us about the comparison between North and South in terms of political, economical, and then social. So in terms of political here on the North, kadamihan ng mga problema being experienced by the North countries. Of course, we have those external threats, di ba? Mga terrorist attacks, di ba? Terrorist activity in the worldwide. Ano mga examples ng mga terrorist attack? We have the attack of the World Trade Center or the hijacking of two airplanes that crash on the two buildings. I know, on the single building of the World Trade Center on September 11, year 2000, di ba? The London bombing and then the Mumbai bombing. So, those are some of the external threats being experienced by the North countries, di ba? However, with the South countries, iilan naman yung mga terrorist attacks. Even though I'm not telling naman na wala. Meron din sila, yun nga lang, compared with the terrorist attacks for the North countries to the South, mas madami sa North talaga. 'Di ba? Ang political naman ng South countries nila, the internal affairs of the nations or the political struggles, madami. Okay? Some of the causes or some of the reasons bakit pangit ang political structure ng isang South country compared to the North because of examples, political struggles. When say political struggles, madaming nag-aaway-away in terms of politics. Even though that is the very nature of politics, however, those struggles were not being resolved by the politicians itself. 'Di ba? Ang nangyayari, nagpapatayan na lang sila. Or minsan, because of those struggles, walang batas na nagagawa kasi nga kinukontra ng isa yung isang batas, ayaw ng isa, and so on and so forth. Very good example of that is here in the Philippines, di ba? We have a tawag nito, budget natin for the Philippine budget for 2021. Ilang buwan na yan na hindi nisasubmit ng Kongreso. Kasi nga, alam mo, ayaw ng isa ito, someone will modify, ayaw ulit ng isa, until such time na hindi na natapos yung budget natin. Di ba? Another example, corruptions. Di ba? I will not anymore expound. Alam natin mga corruption yan. Lack of respect for the rule of law. Tama. If you are a politician, if you're a governor, diba? What is the rule of law? Everyone is equal. No one is above the law. So therefore, the law will be applied to everyone. There would be no exemptions, diba? You're not excused if you have violated the law. However, sa Pilipinas iba. If you are the governor, if you're the congressman, nag-violate ka ng law, I am the governor, the congressman, and therefore you are excused, di ba? So those are some of the examples of political problems on the South, di ba? Next, for the North, economy naman nila, of course, manufacturing, more on industry sila. In terms of hard labor, very cheap ang payment or salary being given to the employees. For the South, most of their own livelihood came from agriculture. Like for example, cotton, tobacco, rice, sugarcane, and different crops as well. And for the social naman, in terms of the North, it is determined by the life in the cities. Yes, of course, for the North, kadamihan kasi sa North, mga syudad yung mga yan. Unlike for South, which they're more on social way of life in farming. So both religion and education were organized, on the North. There were schools and churches in most of the towns. College was reserved for the wealthy. So for the North, halos in terms of aspects of the society, halos kompleto sila. May mga churches, sufficient number of churches, sufficient number of roads. Okay, education and religion were organized, all of those things. However, for the South, ayan, it is determined by the upper class. Meaning, ang nagkumokontrol sa society ay yung mga mayayaman. So, some of the farmers who are working, of course, parang they do not have the voice in their own welfare. So the welfare of the people are being controlled by the wealthy ones. Yan, like for example, plantation owners and their own families. So they are the rich ones. They are the ones who are giving salaries for the farmers. And only children of plantation owners receive any education. So ibig sabihin, so yung mga mayayaman lang, sila ang nabibigyan ng mga education because they have the money for them to pay for their own tuition fees. Small farmers had little or no education since because of poverty, they do not have enough money for them to pay their own tuition fees. The culture of the South revolved around plantation life. So yan ang comparison regarding the North and then the South in terms of political, economical, and then social. So there are three main reasons why our world is so unequal today. So tapusin na natin to lahat. First one, we have colonialism. Today's North-South gap traces its roots to the colonization of the southern world, regions by Europe over the past several centuries. This colonization occurred at the different times in different parts of the world, as did the colonization. So, of course, in terms of colonization, during the time of discovery, we have the Spain, we have the Portugal who colonized, and they got their own colonies, di ba? And then number two here, control by one power over a dependent area of or people, I mean. So, of course, there is a single superpower country who has the power, military equipment, all of those things in order to control a certain country. It is good if that country is using its own power to protect the lives of the deprived ones or to protect some of uh, weak countries or sila yung mga countries na mga cannot defend themselves, di ba? However, it is very unfortunate if a certain superpower country may use his own power in order to get more territories. Di ba? They're using their own military equipment in order to bully some of the countries kasi nga they would like to gain more power and then territories. Kasi they believe that the more territories that you have, the more powerful you are. So, yan. So, trade naman, ang trade, ganito ko lang explain to. Here, in the Philippines, we have a lot of natural resources. One good example of that is we have the use of the wood, the use of nara, the use of mahogany, di ba? So, if we sell our wood to China, let us say sabihin na natin ang isang log or ang isang kahoy, binebenta natin siya ng 20,000 pesos to China. Di ba? So, bibilihin ni China yung wood for 20,000 pesos per log. Now, China will process the log and to make it into furnitures. And from that one log that they have, they're going to sell those furnitures for around 100,000 in the Philippines. So, sinong nanalo? China or Philippines? Of course, si China ang nanalo. Even though considering that the wood came from the Philippines. Kasi ganyan nangyayari sa mundo natin. The raw materials came from the developing countries and it was processed by the first world country at binebenta na naman sa atin. Of course, for the debt naman, their products were losing money in the global economy, so they needed to increase their own production. So that it pertains about global competition. So it is a competition between companies for the different countries. However, some of the companies cannot compete with bigger companies because they lack production. So what they do there, they need to get more debts or loans with international banks para nang sa ganun, it will increase their own production so that they could go on the trend of the competition. However, some of the countries could go with the trend. Yung ibang countries naman or some of the companies cannot pay their own debt and it will lead now to bankruptcy. Okay? So, yun, ang debt natin, if it is not well planned, it is not well organized, hindi ito na plano ng mabuti, ang mangyayari, lalaki lang ng lalaki ang debt natin hanggang maghirap na tayo. Very good example is yung Sri Lanka. So, they borrowed money from China until such time it was not handled well by the politicians or by the government of Sri Lanka hanggang yung utang nila lumaki ng lumaki. Hanggang ngayon, hindi na nila mabayaran ito sa China. Kaya gusto ni China, kunin na lang yung bansa nila. Okay? So parang ganong bagay lang. So yan ang North and South gap natin. Okay, so so ito ay mga ano lang, summary na lang, and please do read all of this one. The division of the North and then South divide or rich or poor divide is the socio-economic and political division that exists between the wealthy developed countries known collectively as the North, di ba? And the poorer developing countries known as least developed countries or also known as the South. Although most nations comprising the North are in fact located in the Northern Hemisphere, the divide is not primarily defined by geography. It is defined on how stable their own political, economy, social, di ba? So it is more an economical actually to. As nations become economically developed, they may become part of the North. Okay, regardless of geographical location, while any other nations which do not qualify for developed status are in effect deemed to be part of the South. So meaning of that, whatever part of the world your nation is, as long as you become a well-developed country or first world country, you will now become the North. The North mostly covers the West and then the First World with much of the Second World. The North and South divide has more recently been named as the development gap. So iisa lang tawag dyan. It could be the North and South divide or development gap. This places a greater emphasis on closing the evident gap between the rich or more economically developed countries and then the poor countries. Okay? So in terms of economic development, there exists an enormous gap between northern and southern countries, which has been increased by globalization. When you say globalization, na-discuss na natin yan, the rich becomes richer and then the poor becomes poorer, di ba? The process by which regional economies, societies, and cultures have become integrated through a global network of political ideas through communication, transportation, and trade.